Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. In addressing the children's medication shortage, the province announced a huge purchase of both pain and fever medicine. It appears as though the Trudeau government may be backpedaling on Bill C-21, which may now not include a ban on hunting rifles. And a scathing report from the Auditor General shows how Ottawa gave billions of dollars of CERB and other support payments to ineligible Canadians. We have reaction.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The province says it has secured 5 million bottles of children's acetaminophen and ibuprofen to combat the shortage of children's pain and fever medicine. The shipment will be arriving from Atabay Pharmaceuticals and Fine Chemicals very soon. Premier Daniel Smith says the medication was desperately needed, with children's hospitals being overwhelmed, along with cold and flu season now upon us.
We want to make sure parents have access to the medication that they need, because if they can't break the fever, they end up in the hospital rooms. And that is what's causing the pressure on our hospitals, not here, but across the entire country. So I think that our job in providing health services is to make sure that people have the medication that they need so they can treat at home, and also make sure that the hospitals are able to deal with patients efficiently when they show up, so that they're not waiting for hours with a lot of distress and worry. So that's how we're being proactive.
Meanwhile, here in Lethbridge, health officials say the Chinook Regional Hospital is at or near capacity when it comes to the ICU department. Dr. Aaron Lowe, AHS South Zone Director, says out of the 20 ICU beds we have, they currently have about 17 adult patients in them, many of them suffering from influenza.
It appears, as you've also probably known, as you've learned about this, that the circulating strains are more severe strains. And so, and that's partly why we are seeing such a severe viral season in Alberta. The vast majority of the viral illness right now is influenza, but there are other viruses as well, including RSV, some COVID, but not tons actually. I just spoke with before this both the charge nurses and physicians in the ICU, both in Messinat and Lethbridge, and actually there's sort of a handful of viral illness, but many of the patients are just sort of general ICU patients, heart failure, pneumonia, others like that.
Dr. Lowe adds the immunization rate against the flu in the South Zone is only around 21%, which is the same as the provincial average. He's encouraging more people to go out and get their flu shots. The government of Alberta is introducing a bill that would squash squatters' rights. In our province, adverse possession allows a person who has occupied another person's land for 10 years to claim ownership of that land. Claims can only be made against private landowners. With the UCP introducing the Property Rights Statutes Amendment Act of 2022, it would abolish the ability of squatters to make a claim and give landowners the same protections only once reserved for the government. The proposed bill amends the Law of Property Act. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is taking part in a roundtable discussion with many of our country's big city mayors at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities meeting. Trudeau says a top priority for his government is moving forward with Bill C-21, which he says will protect Canadians.
Whether it's investing massively to strengthen our border measures against guns coming in illegal from the United States, but also moving forward with a national freeze on handguns. We're also moving forward on banning assault-style weapons. We banned them a couple of years ago. We're continuing to make sure that we get that list right. We are not going after rifles and shotguns used by hunters and others in a law-abiding way, but we are going against those guns that are designed to kill the largest number of people in the smallest amount of time.
Political reporter Brian Lilly has been keeping a very close eye on the debate surrounding the Trudeau Liberals' gun ban, Bill C-21, and the amendments. He says since hunters like Montreal Canadiens goalie Carey Price spoke out, politicians may be backpedaling a little.
Carey Price did one simple post to Instagram saying, "I'm not a criminal. I love my family. I love my country. I look after my neighbor. What Justin Trudeau's doing is unjust." One simple post. Trudeau changed and on Monday was saying, we're listening to the concerns of hunters. They went from saying, this isn't happening to we're listening. That's a major change. And I can tell you, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet and the NDP, which still represent some rural ridings, they're feeling the heat and they are reconsidering their support for these changes.
Mr. Lallet will also talk about alleged Chinese police stations setting up shop in parts of Canada. He'll have details coming up in the second half of our show. Well, it seems as though the federal government overdid it when it came to procuring enough COVID-19 vaccines. The Auditor General says the Trudeau Liberals had an oversupply of millions of vaccines, and most of them are likely to expire and go to waste by the end of the year. Karen Hogan gave the Public Health Agency of Canada and Procurement Canada a thumbs up when it came to quickly getting enough doses, but a large thumbs down when it came to managing the supply. The federal Conservatives say it was a terrible mismanagement of taxpayers' dollars.
Sadly, this Trudeau Liberal government not only created contracts outside of that program, but also then, as you correctly point out, dipped into that program, taking 1.9 million doses from developing countries. And certainly what we see then is this overbuying of vaccines, which again, as we clearly know from today, has resulted in almost $2 billion worth of wasteful spending. Spending that Canadians cannot afford to have this government undertake, which contributes to, as we very well know, 40-year high inflation levels, and then difficulties with, of course, 20% of Canadians not having appropriate nutrition and 1.5 million Canadians in 1 month having to visit food banks. It's a sad state of affairs for Canadians.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says there was not only wasted taxpayers' money when it came to the oversupply of vaccines, but also for a huge amount of money given to ineligible recipients at the height of the pandemic. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the CTF, joins us now from Ottawa to talk more about the Auditor General's report, which discusses the waste in more detail. Franco, how much are we talking about in overpayments?
So right away, we see that $4.6 billion was given to ineligible recipients. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because then you have at least another $27.4 billion in suspicious payments. So you add that together, and we're looking at about $32 billion given out in suspicious payments or to ineligible recipients. $32 billion. Let's put that into perspective, okay? Because for $32 billion, you could build more than 30 hospitals across Canada, or you could essentially cover the entire federal tax bill for the province of Saskatchewan for 3 years. So this is a huge sum of money that was paid out in suspicious payments or to ineligible recipients.
So who did the Auditor General identify as ineligible when it came to CERB or support payments?
In the Auditor General report, it lists a few different types of groups of people that I think Canadian taxpayers need to know who ended up getting money. There was $1.6 billion to people who looks like they quit their job instead of actually losing their job because of what was going on with COVID-19. Then there was $6.1 million given to people who were in jail and $1.2 million given to dead people.
Wow. Will the money be paid back by those who are not eligible to receive the funding in the first place?
That's a good question, right? Because taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for people who are ineligible. But I think we have to make a distinction between two types of groups. If there are people who specifically try to game the system, then they absolutely need to be held accountable, and the government needs to get that money back. Now, other people who may have just made a mistake, well, the government still has to get the money back, but the CRA does need to be as accommodating as possible with those group of people, and just understanding that right now is a very difficult time for many Canadians.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. Major General Danny Fortin spoke with the media after a Quebec civilian court acquitted him of one charge of sexual assault. It stems from an allegation dating back to 1988. Fortin was the military officer in charge of Ottawa's COVID-19 vaccine rollout until May of 2021. He was removed from that position after the allegation came to light.
I am so relieved by the judge's decision today. As you would expect, this is a huge burden off our shoulders, my shoulders, and that of my family. This is one important step in an ongoing process to prove my innocence and recover my reputation. I did not do what I was accused of. Did not. I'm not guilty and I'm innocent. I can see that the complainant genuinely believes she was assaulted. Victims of assault need and deserve our support.
Today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. It's also the 33rd anniversary of the mass shooting in Montreal at École Polytechnique Engineering School, which saw 14 women lose their lives. We still mourn many of those who were lost due to acts of violence. According to Stats Canada, however, over the past 12 years, cases of domestic violence have actually been decreasing. Officials at the University of Lethbridge held a learning lunch highlighting the importance of reflecting on this very important day.
Today is a significant day, especially in post-secondary context, where unfortunately 14 young women lost their lives because of wanting to pursue a degree in a field that was predominantly dominated by male colleagues, but wanted to get the opportunity to experience and have academic careers. It's really a significant moment of recognizing the importance of the day, but also the importance of how we as institutions have to continue to do this work to ensure that we create safety for our students, no matter the gender identities or the diversity of expressions that they have can come into that space.
Mathurin Mo says it's our responsibility to look at our fundamental differences not as a negative, but as an opportunity for innovation and engagement. The Streets Alive mission in Lethbridge now has a new warming centre which opened on December the 1st. It's a place where many who are homeless can keep warm and receive up to 3 meals a day. Co-founder of Streets Alive, Julie Kissick, says people can stay as long as they want and they have the capacity to host a number of individuals who are most in need. Kissick says as the mercury plummets outside, the centre will be filling up inside.
Well, the warming center is needed because our shelter has been running at capacity for quite a while and is leaving people on the street still. The latest pit count had 211 souls on the street, and the capacity for the shelter is around 100, and so we now have capacity for 60 to come. They can't sleep, but they can come in and be warm, have a cup of coffee, sit down. Even if they sleep in a chair, that's fine, and just be able to be safe from the streets and from the cold.
Kissick says the warming centre located at the Streets Alive mission is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as needed. The holiday season is a time when families get together to celebrate Christmas. Now, the Better Business Bureau says scammers work extra hard during the holidays to prey on consumers. The BBB released their 12 Scams of Christmas, which highlight some of the top scams such as fake websites, puppy scams, and romance scams. Wes LaFortune, the media and communications specialist with the Southern Alberta BBB, says they found that this year more than $380 million has been lost to online shopping scams across North America. He says only about 5% of those who were defrauded of funds reported the scams.
We're talking about $300, $400 million in losses. That actually translates into a lot more than that, probably 20 times more. We're talking about billions of dollars then of losses. So this is a huge problem. The more people get to know how to shop safely online, use your research, work with reputable online retailers, watch for that HTTPS secure websites. If you do those things, you're going to really go a long way to protect yourself and your family.
The Alberta RCMP is also warning of the so-called grandparents, grandchild, or emergency scams, which have so far cost Albertans more than $3.5 million in 2022. Powerlifting is a very popular sport for many age demographics. Now, a local 72-year-old powerlifter, Michael Marcinkowski, recently competed for Poland at the World Drug-Free Powerlifting Federation Championships in the UK. He's been powerlifting since 1998. Video journalists caught up with a man at Cut Fitness here in Lethbridge as he showcased his trophy he won at the tournament.
Michael Marcinkowski was the proud winner of first place in the men's 70 to 74 age category at the World Drug-Free Powerlifting Federation Championships in November. He lifted an impressive 170 kilos, which is just over 374 pounds in the deadlift category. He also squatted 110 kilos, which equals to about 242 pounds. And to top off his run, he bench pressed 80 kilos, which translates to just over 160 176 pounds. Marcinkowski came close to beating the world record for his age group in the deadlift class.
11 kilo more, that's not happen. So looking forward, Sardinia, I'm going to try again, same world record is, I have to beat 180.5 kilos, so 181 kilo I have to beat.
At 72 years old, Marcinkowski is showing no signs of slowing down. He says he has plans to compete again for Poland at the next World Drug-Free Powerlifting Federation Championships in 2023. The Polish man has one important tip to ensure longevity in the powerlifting game.
Stay away from drugs and do hard, workout.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That is very impressive. Congratulations. The first official day of winter is not until December the 21st, but we've already seen our fair share of snow and cooler temperatures, haven't we, here in southwestern Alberta? Peter Van Leer is a licensed auto mechanic and owner of Southern Alberta Auto Care. He says when it comes to winterizing your vehicle, to ensure that you have proper windshield washer fluid.
You definitely want to have the winter fluid in there. That's rated for about minus 40, 45. And make sure you do that while the weather's still warm, because a lot of people put summer fluid or bug wash in there, which will freeze up and literally crack your windshield washer fluid reservoir. And then some of those are not fun to change, or they are expensive.
Mr. Van Leer will also discuss the difference between all-season versus all-weather tires with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Well, we saw more snow and cooler temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta. Fortunately, a warming trend is on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. It was cold and snowy in Lethbridge again today. We didn't see much better than minus 20 degrees. Tonight, expect more of the white stuff developing with the temperature holding steady around minus 20. Wednesday, the warmer temperature should arrive. Expect lots of sunshine and a high near zero. Thursday, even warmer with a high near 4 degrees. Cooling off slightly on Friday with a high of +1. And Saturday, the mercury will dip to minus 3. Now, the average high for this time of year is +1 with an average low of minus 11. The highest temperature on this day was recorded in 1987 at 16 degrees, and the record low was a very chilly minus 34 set back in 1956. The sun rose at 8:13 and set at 4:32. Checking out Wednesday's national forecast now, expect rain or drizzle with a high of 6 degrees in Victoria, showers and 5 for Vancouver. Calgary will be partly cloudy and a high near +1. In Edmonton, expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of only -2. It'll be partly cloudy and -15 for Regina. Lots of sunshine and -15 as well for Saskatoon on Tuesday. Sunshine and -21 for Winnipeg. In the central part of the country, expect rain and a high of 9 degrees in Toronto, showers and 5 degrees for Ottawa, lots of rain and 9 degrees in Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, expect rain and 8 degrees in Fredericton, light showers and 8 degrees as well in Halifax, rain and 7 in Charlottetown, and in St. John's, expect periods of drizzle and a high of only 3 degrees on Wednesday.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Stats Canada says our country's merchandise trade surplus nearly doubled in October over September to $1.2 billion. The agency says that was up from a revised surplus of $607 million in September. StatsCan says total imports were up 0.6%, while exports rose 1.5%. It says exports of consumer goods were up 9.7%. Exports of farm, fishing, and intermediate food products increased 10.2% to a record $5.5 billion, boosted by wheat and canola. A House of Commons committee studying food inflation in Canada heard from grocery store executives. Officials from Loblaw and Sobeys parent company Empire told MPs that food prices have been rising because of higher costs incurred by suppliers. Loblaw's executives disputed an accusation that grocery giants are taking advantage of inflation to drive up their own bottom line. The rising cost of food has become a hot-button issue, with prices jumping 11% in October compared with a year earlier. The latest edition of Canada's Food Price Report has researchers predicting prices will rise between 5% and 7% next year before easing in the summer. Cenovus Energy is boosting its capital spending budget for next year to between $4 and $4.5 billion. The forecast for the current year is between $3.3 to $3.7 billion. The increase comes as the Calgary-based company looks to boost upstream production next year by more than 3% to between 800 and 840,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. Total downstream crude is expected to increase around 28% to between 610 and 660,000 barrels per day, thanks to the restart of the Superior Refinery in Wisconsin and the expected additional 50% interest in the Toledo Refinery. Canfor announced it is slowing production at all of its solid wood facilities in Alberta and BC due to weak market conditions. The Vancouver-based company says the curtailments will begin December 19th and will range from 1 to 4 weeks. It says the move will reduce production by around 150 million board feet in this and next month. Canfor says it anticipates that the majority of its BC facilities will operate below full capacity in the new year as it continues to adjust operating rates to align with market conditions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford marked the opening of Canada's first full-scale electric vehicle manufacturing plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. Officials say the General Motors Cami production plant, which was retooled to build the company's all-electric vehicle brand, is expected to build 50,000 electric vehicles by the year 2025. Trudeau says a number of countries are looking to invest in Canada right now.
When they invest in Canada, you get that reliability for decades, for generations to come. We also have the raw materials that the global economy needs.
We're leveraging every part of the EV supply chains. We have everything we need to make the cars of the future in Ontario by Ontario workers from start to finish. GM's commitment to this plant is a massive vote of confidence in our province and our incredible workers. Together with partners like GM, we're building Ontario for today and for tomorrow.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 252 points on the day to finish at 19,990. The Dow was down 350 points to 33,596. The S&P 500 was down 57 on the day to 3941. And the Nasdaq was down 225 points to 11,014. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 245 to 74.48 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 21 cents to 5.37 US. Gold was down 20 cents to 17.70.84 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 22.20 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.41 per bushel. Barley's at $9.69, canola's at $19.43, and corn is at $11.43 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.68 to $151.55. Feeder cattle January contract was down $1.98 to $181.80, and lean hogs were up 20 cents to $82.28. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 73.24 US. Recapping one of our top stories, health officials say the Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge is at or near capacity when it comes to the ICU department. Dr. Aaron Lowe, South Zone Medical Director for AHS, says out of the 20 ICU beds, they currently have around 17 adult patients in them, many of them suffering from influenza. Dr. Lowe says the immunization rate against the flu in the South Zone is only around 21%, which is the same as the provincial average. He's encouraging more people to go out and get the flu shot. A new report from the Federal Auditor General says billions of dollars were wasted on COVID-19 vaccines, and even more was wasted on support payments for ineligible Canadians. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have details for us coming up shortly. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Come out and support the 26th annual Canadian Tire Teddy and Toque Toss at the NMAX Centre taking place Friday, December 9th. Enjoy an energetic hockey game between rivals the Lethbridge Hurricanes and the Medicine Hat Tigers. And on the first Hurricanes goal, throw a stuffed Teddy or Toque, which will be collected and given out to kids in need. Fans can visit both Canadian Tire locations in Lethbridge, and with a $15 Toque or Teddy Bear purchase, receive a free ticket to the game. Tickets can also be purchased at the NMAX Centre or online at lethbridgehurricanes.com. The Interfaith Food Bank is looking for volunteers to help in administration, the warehouse, and kitchen. The commitment is 3 to 4 hours once or twice a week. Through your help, you'll be providing food security in our community and enjoy a sense of purpose by serving others. For details on volunteering, contact Bill at volunteer@interfaithfoodbank.ca or by calling 403-320-8779. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
A new report from the Federal Auditor General says billions of dollars were wasted on COVID-19 vaccines, and even more was wasted on support payments for ineligible Canadians. Now, to chat about this in more detail is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, columnist from the Toronto Sun, who joins us from the Big Smoke. Now, Brian, before we chat about ineligible payments through CERB and other programs, what did the auditor find on waste when it comes to the vaccination program?
Major waste, Hal, but I'd say that this is something most Canadians would look at and say, okay, understandable waste. What the Auditor General found was that 169 million doses were actually contracted for, and we've heard at various points up to 400 million doses have been contracted for, but there were different clauses as to whether the vaccines would be developed, would they be successful in going through trials and all of that. And so and she points out that early on they signed contracts with 7 different vaccine manufacturers. And I've had a lot of criticisms about the vaccine rollout in Canada, first starting with a Chinese company that fell apart, then being late to the party and being behind everyone else. I find that there's problems with that, but I'm not sure how much Canadians are going to be questioning the issue of overspending on vaccines to make sure that we got them in time. But still, it is a tremendous amount of waste. There were about 84 million, a little over that were sent out to the provinces and territories and administered to Canadians. But, over 80,000, over 80 million that were not administered. 30 million that were, 32 million, I believe, just looking down at the numbers, 32.5 million doses were donated. That was worth about $1 billion. Another 50.6 million doses were deemed surplus and offered for donation. Some of them weren't picked up on, and in fact, more than 13 million expired before they could be donated. So a lot of waste there. But I think on this front, Canadians will say, well, you had to buy before you knew what was going to work, so we'll give you a pass. This hasn't been an issue that's generated a lot of anger when we've written about it before at the Sun and elsewhere. So I don't see them getting anger on that. On the other issue related to support payments, I think you will find a lot of anger.
Yeah, let's chat about that for a moment here, Brian. Now, when the support programs such as CERB and the wage subsidy were in place, there were a number of stories surfacing about ineligible payments. How big of a problem was this according to the audit report?
Well, if you listen to the government at the time, there were no issues with ineligible payments. And how dare you question that? But we talked about it here on this show, that at one point there were senior bureaucrats saying, hey, wait a minute, we're sending payments to people who aren't eligible, people in jail, people who were living on disability support payments before and lost no income, people who, were applying for children that didn't live with them, all kinds of things. And the bureaucrat said, this is a problem and we should stop this. And at that point, it was only $1 or $2 billion worth of ineligible payments. And the political masters said, no, keep sending the money, get the money out the door. We don't care about the waste. This is COVID. Let's get to it. And to a degree, I can imagine Canadians saying, yeah, look, there's going to be some waste. We're trying to help people at the right moment. But now listen to these numbers. I want to read them to you. So for overpayments to ineligible recipients, we're talking $4.6 billion, including $3.1 billion paid to 1.8 million recipients who've received lump sum payments they weren't eligible for. There's another $27.4 billion, Hal, that the Auditor General says needs to be investigated further, including $15 billion to businesses who claim to have lost more money than they did when their claims to the support payments were compared and contrasted to their GST, HST filings. So that is a major bit of waste going on. We're talking about more than $30 billion potentially of ineligible payments. They've recouped about $2 billion. And this works out to about 5% of the COVID payments. There's another factor that I can elaborate on if you want. That is the fact that we were paying people more than they lost, and that's in this audit report as well. So far, not getting as much interest in the media reports out there.
And the taxpayers are on the hook. Wow, that's incredible. Brian, now we've chatted about Chinese police stations in the Toronto area in the past. Now there's a report of a new Chinese police station in Vancouver. Now you've investigated this. Answer me this, are they actual police stations? And how concerned should we be about these reports?
We should be concerned about the reports, but we should also be wary about what is being reported. When news broke that there were 3 Chinese police stations here in Toronto, I visited the addresses, the locations that they were supposedly operating out of. One of them was a home in suburban Toronto, out in the Markham area. Another was one of these buildings, where offices set up in an industrial park, and it was all legit businesses. And the third was a convenience store. So these are not police stations per se. I'm told that, look, people are operating out of these locations, and they go out and they intimidate the local Chinese diaspora community, that they will come up to people who have moved here and say, look, you're wanted back home, or one of your relatives did something wrong. You better come back to Canada or back to China. That is apparently what they're doing. It'd be more correct to say they're intimidation stations. They're not a police station where you're going to go down and file a complaint about somebody, where Chinese police in uniform are going to go out and arrest somebody. None of that is happening. Now, according to some reports, that does happen in other countries with large Chinese populations, and we're talking about developing countries, less affluent than Canada, countries that are accepting large payments from China for infrastructure. China is essentially buying off some countries, turning them into vassal states. And there are reports that in some of those countries, they do allow Chinese police to operate. That is not what's happening here. We have to be very concerned about this. I would consider this Chinese interference, Chinese intimidation in the internal affairs of Canada and then the lives of Chinese Canadians who left and came here for a reason. But we have to be careful when we call them Chinese police stations. It's a serious issue. Prime Minister Trudeau's raised it with Chinese President Xi. But I would caution on all fronts here.
Brian, let's talk about Bill C-21, a hot-button topic right now, the Liberals' gun ban bill. The Trudeau government continues to focus on legal gun owners and changes to C-21, which would potentially include hunting rifles, which has angered a large number of Canadians, including Carey Price with the Montreal Canadiens. In fact, you have him, on the front page of The Sun? Why don't you show our viewers
it's
there?
on the front page of The Sun with the headline that says price change, because up until Carey Price spoke out about this, the Trudeau government's response to anyone who said, look, your latest changes are going to include hunting rifles and shotguns, their response was, that's disinformation. That's not true. You're lying. You're making things up. We could all see the list. We could see things like the Webley and Scott waterfowl shotgun. How this is an old British hunting shotgun that you're more likely to see an aristocrat using if you're watching The Crown or Downton Abbey on Netflix than you are to see at a crime scene in Canada. But time and again, the Trudeau Liberals just ignored the media. They ignored the Conservative opposition. They ignored groups like the CCFR or the CCSA. They just said it's not true. Carey Price did one simple post to Instagram saying, I'm not a criminal. I love my family. I love my country. I look after my neighbor. What Justin Trudeau's doing is unjust. That got picked up big time in Francophone media across Quebec because, of course, he is a Habs great. He's an incredible goalie. He's played on the international stage for Canada. So this guy carries weight. One simple post. Trudeau changed and on Monday was saying, we're listening to the concerns of hunters. They went from saying, this isn't happening to, we're listening. That's a major change. And I can tell you, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet and the NDP, which still represent some rural ridings, they're feeling the heat and they are reconsidering their support for these changes. I think Bill C-21 overall will go through, but there will be some changes before this passes.
But Brian, there was a major gun bust in Toronto recently, and none of the guns that were confiscated were in fact hunting rifles.
No, none at all. So there were 62 firearms seized. There were 5 AR-15s. 4 of those could not be traced. They had their serial numbers, swiped off. But most insiders will tell you they believe they came from the United States. These 62 firearms mainly came from Arizona and Texas. They were smuggled into Canada. Only one of the 62 actually came from Canada. It was a stolen handgun. So that shows you where the problem is. The problem is smuggled firearms, not not rifles and shotguns that are used for hunting, not even rifles that you think look scary but are used for target shooting. That's not the problem in Canada. And Toronto Police Chief James Raymer said as much during his news conference, and he called for changes in how bail is administered. The main guy in this gun smuggling ring, he's facing a bunch of charges, including a number of charges related to his prohibition order against possessing guns. How do you get a prohibition order against possessing guns? Serious crimes in the past. In fact, 7 years ago, he was facing murder charges for allegedly shooting somebody. I don't know if he was ever convicted, allegedly shooting somebody in broad daylight. So, we're talking about repeat offenders getting out on bail. Chief Raymer says we've got to fix that system. We've got to have serious penalties. Instead, the Trudeau government's going the other way, reducing penalties for repeat gun crime offenders through Bill C-22, the one that goes along with his gun control bill, C-21.
Brian, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made it perfectly clear he does not like Alberta's sovereignty within the United Canada Act. Now, will the Trudeau Liberals actually do anything about it, as many, including Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley, has requested?
I think Rachel Notley's effectively asked the federal government to intervene and nullify an Alberta statute. That would be a tremendous incursion into provincial powers. Look, I have questions about whether some aspects of the Solidarity Act or Sovereignty Act, are legal or constitutional, but much of it reads like statements you'd see on any given day from Quebec politicians. And you never see the outcry over that when it's Quebec, but you see it when it's Alberta. It's much like here in Ontario. Doug Ford used the notwithstanding clause. It's used all the time in Quebec. It doesn't cause an outrage when Quebec does it. It did when Doug Ford did it. Effectively, for the central Canadian commentariat, if you're not from Quebec, and especially if you're a conservative-minded politician, if you do something they don't like, they're going to yell and scream. If Quebec does it, they're going to stay silent. There's an absolute double standard going on. We've seen this play out before with things like the firewall letter, where people say, how dare Alberta ask for the ability to collect its own taxes or have its own pension plan or its own provincial police force? All things that Quebec does. Ontario has its own provincial police force. There's nothing that says Alberta must use the RCMP from here to eternity. But anytime that Alberta tries to flex its muscle just a little bit, Central Canadians act as if you are trying to leave the country, and they get more upset than they do at Quebec actually trying to leave the country.
Wow. Brian, a news organization was escorted out of the Parliamentary Press Gallery by armed police. Blacklock's is out on the Hill. What happened there?
This is a story that involves an awful lot of personalities, a lot of personal disputes. Is there perhaps a bit of anger, resentment towards Blacklock's, which goes in a different way, that pokes and prods at the other media outlets for taking government subsidies? I would believe so, but there's a lot of personal stuff going on here as well. I'm not sure I want to get into all of that. I've known Tom Korski for quite a few years. He was on Parliament Hill when I would use the hot room. There was a dispute over how he was behaving in the hot room. That's a communal office that small bureaus tend to use. So if you've only got one or sometimes two people on the Hill, you use the hot room. You're sitting in basically office pods. And so people said he was impolite, he was too loud. Nothing that I think requires you being kicked out of the gallery. But as I said, a lot of personal animosity between various people. And it really will perhaps shock people, but simply reminds me that the Parliamentary Press Gallery, of which I was a member for years, is really high school with salaries, and Mean Girls, the movie, without the fashion sense or the snappy one-liners.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who's got a great sense of humor. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, winter has arrived with a vengeance in some parts of Canada anyway, and sometimes we lag a bit behind in properly preparing our vehicles to deal with those winter weather conditions. The result can be simply inconvenient, and other times it can just be downright dangerous. Joining us for some timely advice on this is Peter Van Leer. He is a licensed mechanic and owner of Southern Alberta Auto Care, located just outside of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Peter. Great to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be able to do this.
Oh, wonderful. Well, first thing that comes to mind with winter, obviously, is snow and ice, which is usually what reminds us that it might be a good idea to get some winter tires on our vehicles. But some drivers say that they're just fine with those all-season tires. So can you maybe explain why winter tires are better than those all seasons?
Well, let's talk about tires for a few moments then. Of course, a good winter tire would be your best option, but there are some people that don't have an option to store summer tires in the winter or winter in the summer. So another option that's really good would be an all-weather tire. And one of the reasons being that a winter tire is 3 peak snow mountain rated, so you can legally drive through the mountains. And if you don't have the 3 peak snow mountain rated tires, then you will need to either chain up or just avoid driving altogether. So the good option is an all-weather tire. We recommend that to a lot of customers, especially if they don't have the room for the storage. And there's some really good brands and options out there these days. I'm not going to mention any names because I'm not advertising for anybody in particular.
Good idea. So just curious, is there a difference then between all weather and all season? Are those two different things, or are they kind of synonymous?
Yes, the all season tire, it's a softer tire as well, but they're typically only rated for rain. They say they're a mud and snow tire, but they're not rated for the mountains. And I mean, some of the tires are geared more towards the winter and some geared more towards the touring side, which is a highway tire. But my recommendation would be a winter or an all-weather tire.
Okay, great. Now, can you maybe explain why those tires are better?
Well, they're softer material, and they'll grip. They got what they call siping on it, which is all the little grooves that are cut into the tire. And they're designed to grip the snow better. Now, of course, if you deal with an icy situation, you're better off with a studded winter tire, but that has its downsides as well, because when you're doing a lot of highway driving, even in the winter time, the highways are often dry and will wear the studs down faster than they're designed to. The siping is, of course, good on snow, but not on ice necessarily. It does help, but you still got to drive cautiously and according to conditions.
And of course, there's a price tag when we're talking, attached to that the winter tires or the extra set of tires. So some people put on just 2 winter tires as opposed to 4. Is that a good idea?
Well,
maybe save some money.
That is never a good idea, because the 2 winter tires will potentially cause a control issue.
Okay.
For the reason that your winter tires are going to have much better traction ability, and whatever the other tires are that you have will not. And you could spin out of control very easily and cause an accident or worse.
Okay, so good to keep that in mind. That is a very bad idea.
We always replace them in sets of 4 on a winter or an all-weather tire.
Okay, so what about tire pressure? Should we keep it a bit higher or lower for winter conditions?
Well, lower tire pressure, of course, will give you a little better traction, but it's highly recommended to. There's a rating on the side of each tire that says maximum PSI cold, which would be best rated at about room temperature. And it's better to keep your tires inflated at that. Now, as the temperatures get colder, sometimes people say, well, it looks like my tires are low, and that's simply because of the contraction of the air because of the cold. And then when they're hot, they expand.
Yeah, for sure. So, freezing cold temperatures, not exactly a friend to starting your vehicle. So how do we know when it's time to get that battery replaced?
Well, it's something that we can always do. We can test the batteries, of course, for strength, but batteries are known to fail without warning. And they can do that one day, you'll start it up fine, and then next morning or so, you'll go to start it and it won't do anything, or it'll barely make a noise. Of course, with the colder temperatures brought on, your battery power, the available power to starting the vehicle is significantly less. So if you can get a battery warmer or a trickle charger on there, that'll be very advantageous because it keeps the temperature of the battery up a little higher.
Mm-hmm. And of course, many drivers, especially in the colder climates, plug in their engine block heater overnight to help for a better start in the morning. So any advice on how long this needs to be plugged in for, or at what temperatures you should be doing this?
Well, different vehicles will have a different block heater setup. So if you got a block heater setup that's thermostatically controlled, you could leave it plugged in at all times. Otherwise, if you got a block heater that's rated for, say, 750, 850 watts, or even 1200 watts, you can plug it in for about 3 hours before you leave. And you can get a timer that you can buy at any big store and set it up so that if you know you're going to be leaving or what time you're going to be leaving, you can set it up 3 hours ahead of time. But there are other ones, lower wattage, typically in some of the imports and diesel imports that are only like 50 watts or 75 watts. And in that case, they definitely won't warm up if you're like minus 20 or below that on time to be able to get a good start. So I would recommend those ones to stay plugged in.
Okay, good advice there. Okay, so when it comes to jumper cables, something that's a good idea, obviously, to keep in your car, especially in this cold weather. So does it make a difference as to what kind of cables you have in your car?
Well, make sure you get ones with a good amperage rating, good heavier. Of course, the heavier the wire is, the better the cable is, and the heavier duty the clamps are. Typically, they'll say roughly what they're rated at. If you got a 400 amp clamp on the end of the cables, that's better, or even higher than that. The cheaper dollar store cables, they don't seem to cut it, although I have seen some amazing things done with them.
Wow. Okay. And also maybe explain how to properly boost a vehicle.
Okay, so the best way to do that is hook up your dead vehicle first. Doesn't matter in which order, positive or negative, but let's just go with the positive first. Hook up the negative. Then on your live vehicle, now the note there is some of these vehicles, you're better off to shut the vehicle off because you might end up blowing a computer up because they're sensitive to voltage surges. Then on your live vehicle, you hook up the positive first and then go away from the battery and hook up your negative cable to an alternate ground source, such as a alternator bracket or some kind of a aluminum or steel metal bracket on the engine. If you hook up the positive cable, your last connection, onto the battery on the live vehicle, there's a chance of explosion because there's sulfuric gases that form above the battery because that vehicle has been running and charging. And so if you get the oxygen and that sulfuric gas mixture just correct, you don't want to live to tell about that one.
No, we definitely don't want any explosions, that's for sure. Okay, so Peter, how do we determine if our antifreeze level is at the proper level and if it's at the right mixture to prevent freezing at extreme temperatures?
Well, there are simple little tools called an antifreeze tester that you can purchase, and you can test the strength of your antifreeze. And because it's a clear plastic little reservoir that the fluid gets sucked up into, there's a little squeeze ball on it, and it will draw the fluid up into it. has a little gauge on there that will tell you, there's a few varying designs of this tester, but it'll tell you how many degrees it is good for below zero. It's also got to be clean. It's also good to make sure that your different additives are up to par in the antifreeze. So if you've gone past 5 years, typically it's good to drain as much out as you can and replenish it, just to replenish the additives in your coolant.
Okay, let's talk about wiper blades. Should vehicles have different wiper blades for winter? Not to mention, of course, windshield washer fluid. Very important.
Right. Well, definitely. Windshield washer fluid, we'll start with that. You definitely want to have the winter fluid in there. That's rated for about minus 40, 45. And make sure you do that while the weather's still warm, because a lot of people put summer fluid or bug wash in there, which will freeze up and literally crack your windshield washer fluid reservoir. And then some of those are not fun to change.
I bet.
They are expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
Windshield wipers, it's good to have a good winter wiper blade or a monolithic blade, which is a blade that's got no extra hinges or anything on it. And because otherwise it'll ice up and it'll not contour your windshield correctly. Also, regarding wiper blades, make sure you break your windshield wipers loose before you start the vehicle, because you could either strip out your mechanism, you could break a wiper blade. There's a number of different things that can be hampered if you turn on the wipers without breaking them loose first.
Really good advice here, Peter. I actually didn't even know that there were different types of washer fluids for different seasons. So thank you for that, definitely. And, you know, we often also see people driving with iced up windshields and windows. So should we be checking our blower fans and defrost regularly?
Well, one thing that happens, and it's often neglected as well, is the cabin air filter. Most vehicles these days have them. And so the air gets filtered through the cabin air filter before it enters the cabin through the vents or defrost. And being overlooked and collecting dust and different debris from driving over the years, it can hamper the amount of air that's flowing through the vents. So that's one thing to check if your vehicle is equipped with. Typically, your fan will blow. The other thing is if it's not blowing, then you've got another problem, perhaps electrical. Either the fan motor is gone, or you'll have a thing that's called a resistor block that's gone. Some people will have just high speed only blowing and nothing in between, or it won't blow at all. Just say I had a cabin air filter last week from a customer. The mice had been in there and had packed the thing full of wheat. So there was hardly any airflow through there whatsoever.
Oh, wow. So check for mice in the wintertime as well. What about oil? We obviously get our oil changed any time of the year, but is there a certain type of engine oil that's adjusted for winter?
Well, it used to be typically years ago that you had your 530 and your 1030 oil, and you'd go to a 530 in the wintertime for a lot of vehicles. But these days, you got to be careful because engines are specifically designed for certain oils. You got the synthetic 020s in a lot of the import vehicles. There's still 530s available for some of your domestics, 520 typically. Most of the Ford vehicles will use a 520 oil. It's better to stick with what it's designed for. And also, my advice by experience is if your vehicle is not designed for synthetic oil, stick with just general, with the regular oil or a synthetic blend oil. Synthetic oil does not have oil seal swelling properties in there, so you could end up with engine oil leaking.
Okay, are there any other fluids that are susceptible to trouble in the winter while we're on the topic of?
Well, you always got to look at all your fluids, your power steering fluid, check if there's any contamination, your brake fluid, check it for contamination. And if that's the case, have it flushed out. I do, however, not recommend engine flushes or engine cooling system flushes. You may end up with bigger problems down the road. If you do the flushes, what happens is when the engine was designed, everything is circulating one particular direction, and some debris gets trapped in behind certain areas. And if you start to flush it out backwards and forwards, you break that debris loose, and you could end up with things like head gasket leaks or water pump leaks or other leaks.
We're almost out of time here, but any final tips on making sure our vehicles are up to snuff for winter?
Well, definitely winterizing a vehicle is something not to be neglected. And if you go to your mechanic and just ask him to do a winterizer inspection, and everything from tire pressures to fluids, again, windshield wipers, make sure everything is blowing good. And so also check your belts and hoses for cracks and leaks. And yeah.
Great. Peter, thanks so much. Great advice as well. Peter Van Leer is the owner of Southern Alberta Auto Care, located just outside of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Rocher on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.